Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to another Unified IT video, and today we're going to be talking about how to set up your guys' UniFi network. A little bit of context as to what I do a lot of the times. I deal with a lot of bigger networks, a lot of Cisco, mainly Extreme too, but it's always good to come back to Ubiquity and kind of show you guys and apply some of those more larger broad scale topics to kind of configure and max out your UniFi setup. We're going to talk about a lot of things, brush through a lot of settings today. But before that, if you guys need help setting up any of your own networks, any of your own Ubiquity gear, we're a full stack IT company. We'll help you guys do anything you need. Just go ahead and visit our website down below. We actually do a lot of managed IT as well. So just starting at $25 a seat, we can go ahead and help you guys out with whatever you need. So visit our website, link will be down in the description, but let's go ahead and get into the video. So first thing we're gonna go ahead and do is power on the UDM Pro. As you can see, we have it in our rack over here, and we have two things plugged in right now. We have our WAN port, which is going out to our ISP. That'll be all the way on the far right side. And then on the far left side, you see that we have our computer plugged in. We have it plugged in via our Ethernet cable in the back. So now that the console's actually powered on, let's go ahead and get into our settings here, and let's check our IP address. So this will kind of tell us what the UDM is configured with by default. So we're going to need to grab this address to actually set the device up. So if we go to our settings, our network, we'll see that we have the router's IP, and we've grabbed our own IP. So it's giving us this default right here. So we're just going to copy that into a web browser. We'll go ahead and paste that right into Safari up here. And we can see that we're in the router now. So it's going to ask us for some configuration, startup information. We'll go ahead and first off have to give the device a name. We'll go ahead and name ours Contoso, Florida branch. And of course we have to agree to the terms and services. Go ahead and hit next. So now it'll ask us for our UI.com credentials. So you can either use your existing one or create a new account down below. This is just your cloud account. It'll help you manage a lot of your devices inside of their cloud. So go ahead and sign up with an email and a password and just input them here. So now that we've gone ahead and put our credentials in, it'll actually show you if you've had a UniFi account before, this is your second time setting anything up, if you would like to restore from a backup, but we're just going to go ahead and continue without one. Update schedule. Now for our purposes, if you're actually running a real production network, we're actually going to disable the updates because we want to manually push those out when they come out on our schedule that works best for our network. So we usually always leave those disabled by default because the last thing you want is someone working on something in your UDM restarting. It's never a good thing. This will also ask you if you want to enable the basic configuration for your console. So sending any diagnostics and performance information, we'll just go ahead and leave that unchecked for now. And now it'll start to do speed tests, check our internet speed. It'll usually ask you what your service provider is giving you, so you can kind of input that into the portal. As we can see, it's running our test right now. We'll wait for this to finish. And as we can see, comm cable is comm crap in our area. So we've just finished the test. It'll automatically import the highest results and the lowest results inside of our download and upload. We'll actually just go ahead and put 100 in there since that's actually what we get for most of our stuff for download, about 20 for upload, so we'll leave that there. And then once we hit next, it'll continue the rest of the setup. This is the final step, and that should allow us to see the home page in just a second. Now that our UDM Pro is finally done doing its updates, we're brought to the main home screen. So before we go and touch anything with the network or any of that stuff, let's just go to our settings and check our applications. So usually within the system, we would see if we had any updates that are pending. Looks like that took care of it, as well as the network seems up to date. There are some additional updates as well for things like protect, access, but we're not going to focus too much on those today, if really at all. This is purely just more the network portion of it. So I'm actually going to stop all the other services because we are not enabling any of those for today. And then we can go ahead and actually, I'm going to uninstall most of them because we don't need any of these. So it looks like everything's up to date. We're good to go. If we go back to the dashboard, we'll just head right into our network portion of it. Now for our configuration today, we have one switch and one access point that we're going to plug in here. So if we head on over to our UniFi devices, this is kind of where we'll see everything pop up that is a UniFi device. So we'll go ahead and plug the switch in for now. And we should see that pop up in just a second. And we will click to adopt. We will adopt device. And it looks like the device is attempting to adopt, and it looks like it's given it an IP address, it's getting everything ready. And then finally, we will also plug our access point in as well at the top to adopt that as well. Awesome. And then finally, we will see our access point as well. So we'll just click to adopt that. We will adopt that as well. We'll close out of some of these notifications. Awesome. So this is the very basic setup. If you were to just plug everything in, have it get an IP address from the router, adopt it, this is pretty much as basic as it gets. You could also go into your settings, Wi-Fi, add a network, and then just add it to the APs and let it run. This is the setup that we're not trying to go for today. We're actually trying to take a little bit of time to craft out the network, our different VLANs, different segments, how we actually want to make this work most efficiently for our business, school, whatever application you're actually trying to put this into a production level environment for. So, while the access point is getting ready and doing its adoption, we're going to go and head over to the backbone of our UDM, the settings. We're going to start off with our networks tab. As we see, the default network for, us is the 192.168.1.0 with a /24 subnet. Very basic. If you want to keep it and use the same scheme, feel free. You can use 192.168.2, 3, 4, 5, whatever you want for your VLANs, but we're going to go ahead and modify the existing one because we have a scheme that we like to use. So first thing we're going to do is unclick auto scale network, and we're going to go ahead and actually manage these things the way that we want to do. As well as we're also going to go ahead and click manual down here. It'll give us a little bit more options to play with. So our host address, we're going to go ahead and change this. We're going to do 10.69.1.0. And we're going to go ahead and select the /24. We actually have to do the host address as .1 because it's asking for what we want to make the host. So the way we'll do this is use 1069 as the first two octets that are fixed. Then the last two will actually be the ones that will see any change or variation. So it'll be 1069.1, 1069.2, 1069.3, so on and so forth. And then the final octet over here will actually be used for our devices that will connect, 1 through 253, whatever we want to have there as our range. I usually leave our DHCP range down here. I don't do the first 6. I actually usually reserve the first 10 or 15. So I started off at .115 and then leave it through 254. That's usually fine. But again, the scheme we're going for is 10.69. And then our VLAN name, and then the last octet will be for the hosts. So this will be our first network. This network will be the backbone of the entire network. This is what we call our netman network or our net management. This will be for switches, access points, anything that's actually critical to the network itself to operate. So we have 1069.1.1, which will be the router's address, and we left our net mask as /24, which gives us this range right here. We see we have all the way from 15 to 254. So that's fine. Network type is going to be standard. We don't really want to play with the guests for this one. Content filtering, that's kind of up to you. I've noticed that some of this stuff is a little bit aggressive. Some of it works really well. But again, since this is the backbone of our network, we'll just leave that as none. And then we'll kind of scroll down, make sure if you guys have your own DHCP server, you can put all of your information in there if you want a different server, but we're all going to be containerizing it on the actual UDM Pro itself. So we'll leave all that as the same. You also see that we get a little bit more options in here. The least time, I actually put this down in half. I usually go to about 4,000 or 46,000 seconds, which usually the default is 8 days. I usually split it in half to 4 because on our guest networks, typically we'll have a lot of people join and leave. So you can even do as low as 2 days or even hours if you want. But I don't like taxing the UDM Pro that much with all of its tables and stuff like that. So I'll usually leave it to 4 days as a good middle ground. And then there's your domain name. If you're using Active Directory, I highly recommend that you put your domain name in here. It's kind of cool when your clients connect. They see, oh, this is part of the, unified IT network, or, in this case, Contoso network. So we'll just leave this as Contoso. And then we'll do contoso.local for our network. We'll leave the rest of this pretty much the same. We don't need to mess with a lot of the other stuff. And then IPv6, we just won't have anything. So we will go ahead and apply this. And this will take place immediately. So you'll notice if you try and refresh your browser page, obviously we changed the IP address in our subnet. So it's not going to work anymore. So we actually have to go to that new address, which is going to be 10.69.1, and then our router is .1. And we'll go ahead and visit that page. It might take a second to actually propagate and do all of that. In fact, you might actually have to unplug your laptop and plug it back in just to get a new IP address within that range. So we'll go ahead and apply that. We'll also go ahead and unplug our switch and our access point as well to all propagate that stuff. Awesome. So now we got that again. We'll go ahead and log back in. Now that we've logged back in, we see that we're under our new address, our 1069 network. We'll go ahead and go back into our network settings and get ready to set everything else back up. So now that we're in our settings, we're back to where we were. So we have our default network, which again is that network management network. If we go into here, it has all of the things that we just set. It saved all of our options. So we'll go ahead and split the network out into a couple other segments, or vLANs. Of course, most of you guys know what vLANs are, but these are just other virtualized networks that we can go ahead and containerize what happens on some of those networks. So usually now that we have the backbone of our network, we'll actually make the corporate network where most of the hosts themselves will live on, people's laptops, people's desktops, the regular corporate devices that we actually own as the organization. We'll go ahead and put this on. So we'll name this main staff for this one. Router, again, is the router that we're on. We'll go ahead and unselect the auto scale feature. We'll do our 1069. This one's going to be .2.1, so this will be the second network that we're creating. Of course, we have to go to manual. We'll actually give this a VLAN ID. This will actually allow the network to operate as a second layer 2 network by giving it this ID or this tag. And again, since this is the main corporate network, we'll just leave this standard. We'll actually do filtering. We'll actually put this on work mode. This will block some explicit content, and stuff like that. Search engines will be set to safe mode. Some other cool stuff it does, we'll just do that. Again, we'll reserve the first 15 in our DHCP range to save that in case we need to put anything that low for services. And everything else looks good. So we'll go ahead and add this network. That'll be our main staffing network. And then we'll go ahead and add our server network. So this network is very pertinent if you're running a lot of on-premise applications or kind of want to carve out a segment for your day-to-day operations or workstations that act as servers. So we'll just go ahead and make this the server VLAN. And we'll make sure, again, we'll change that off. We'll do 10.69.3.1. This will be the third network. Make sure that VLAN ID again is set to 3. It is, again, a work one, standard network. Everything looks good there. This one will I usually reserve in the server network at least the first 25, because usually all of our servers are statically set for the most part, so I don't like anything taking the first chunk of the network. But other than that, we add it, and then it's another standard network. As one of the most contentious networks will be our guest network. Now, this is optional. You don't have to provide this to people, but most places do. So we'll just make this our guest network. Now, typically I kind of hide this one away. So this one will be 10.69. And let's say we're a little bit of a bigger company. I'll actually kind of shove this up in like the 80 range. And in fact, we can actually take this to a whole different level. I actually will probably do 10.68.0.1, and we'll actually do this as a / let's bring that down to a 16. So that actually gives you a lot more possibilities with this network, since usually we'll have, usually we'll see, anywhere from 400 to 500 guests on a network at any point in time. So we'll kind of open this one up a little bit. So we'll bring this down to the 68, and we'll leave this as /16. So our new range becomes a lot wider. Again, we'll give this a different VLAN ID. I'll actually give this I'll give this a VLAN ID of 68 to match the 68 in front. And for network type, we will hit guest network. So your guest hotspot profile will automatically be applied to this guest network. Connected clients will be isolated from all other internal networks. Very important that our guests cannot access any other networks. And we'll actually show you later within the access point, we can separate the guests from talking to any of the other guests, which is a really nice feature. So we'll just make sure that this one is selected for guests. We'll also make sure that this one is family rated. This one actually will block VPNs, which is extremely important if you guys are trying to firewall certain content. A lot of people will attempt to use a VPN to try and get out of that, but that content filtering will actually block most of the VPNs that you try and use. Again, DHCP server for this one's not as pertinent because we have so wide of a range that we're dealing with here, and we'll never really throw anything statically into the guest network, so we'll just add this one for now. Now we see we have our default, our guest, our main staffing one, and our servers. Now the last network that we usually like to add is the IoT and security network. It's very contested of whether these should be together or not. We always separate them no matter what. We don't think that you should just have an extra network for all your miscellaneous devices, because if you have your Nest thermostat on the same network that your door access control is on, that could be a very big problem. A lot of people just like to make an IoT network and just lump sum everything onto that network. But we actually differentiate those two, and we'll actually make an IoT network separately. Again, we'll uncheck the auto scale network option, and we will do our 10.69. Now this is IoT, so I kind of also throw this one up there as well. I'll probably put this in like the 20s just to give us room on the lower side of it. So we'll do 20.1. We'll also make this again a /24. We'll go ahead and change that ID up to 20 to match that octet up there. We can also make this a guest network to isolate this internally from any of the other networks. It'll be nice because that way that IoT network can't talk to our server network. It should never have access to do that. Content filtering isn't super pertinent to this network, since nothing should really be browsing the internet like a traditional guest client would be, so that's kind of up to your own. And again, DHCP range doesn't really matter because I'm not planning on setting anything up statically for IoT. And then we'll just go ahead and add that network. And then the last but not least, we'll create a security VLAN. Now this will be where a lot of our door access control is, maybe 1 or 2 cameras, an NVR, something like that. Now something to keep in mind if you do plan to use Ubiquiti cameras is to always keep the cameras on the same VLAN as the actual NVR. It can use up a lot of east to west traffic for the router's sake of trying to push, 1080p, 7 streams of 1080p over the network, having to route across those VLANs, it could just be unnecessary traffic. So we usually just leave the NVRs on the same network as the actual cameras. So again, we'll unselect auto scale network. We'll do our 10.69, and this one will be .5.1. We'll leave this as manual. We'll do 5 for this one. And we'll take a look at our DHCP server. Again, I usually reserve the first 15 for this in case you want to throw in anything like an MVR or a couple of access control cans, anything like that. So we'll go ahead and hit save to this one as well. And now also remember, don't select guest for this one because we would like to have that cross VLAN communication as well. So, and it looks like we have the backbone structure of our network pretty much laid out. I'll organize these so you guys can see that. Again, we'll go across. Guest is completely different. It's on the 68 octet on the first or the second octet, and we're doing a /16 to give that plenty of addresses for any guests who could want to join the network or anything like that. And then we, go into our default. Again, this is the network for switches, access points, stuff like that. Our main staff, which will be our operating staff, their production machines, stuff like that. And then our servers, pretty obvious. Security, which will be, cameras, access control, and then IoT, which will be our Chromecasts, anything else like that, Apple TVs, conference room stuff. Now that we have those networks created, let's actually create Wi-Fi networks to associate with those physical networks. So this one we will do Contoso staff. Again, this will be on that staffing VLAN that we created, and we can create a password for this. We will just make this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Pretty good, pretty secure password. Now, never do this in production, would never recommend it. And the network, we can actually then attach it to our main staff network. And then it will actually say that we have a couple of access points. This is just the all APs group, but you can actually change if you had different APs in different groups. So you had a first, second, and third floor of a building and you didn't want to broadcast your SSID to all of them. Maybe only the first 2 need them, and the third floor is just kind of like a guest lounge area. We could make different groups and broadcast different SSIDs on that. So, and then in manual here, you can choose, do you want to do both 2.4 and 5? Wi-Fi type will be standard or a guest hotspot, band steering, bandwidth profiles. We can do a whole bunch of stuff like that. But again, since this is the core production network, I want this one to have full bandwidth, full priority. Don't want to limit any of that. And what's cool here is you can actually change the security protocol. I will change it to WPA2 and WPA3 since I know all of our devices will support that. But you might just want to keep it WPA2 if you need that. What's also cool too is if you change this to WPA2 Enterprise, you can point that to a Radius server. So if you use Active Directory credentials, you can have the Wi-Fi network not have a password at all up here and purely just use that Radius server. Now that'll probably be a separate video. You'll have to configure your devices to use certificates, and it's a little bit more of a complex scenario, but you do have that option if you want to enable that. We'll just kick it back to WPA2, WPA3, that password of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's our main staff network and everything else looks good. So we'll go ahead. You can also do the Wi-Fi scheduler down here. If you turn that on, you can do certain days of the weeks it's broadcasted, certain times it's not. It's actually kind of cool for production if a lot of your staff isn't at the office all the time. It might be a little bit more secure to not broadcast that. Again, completely up to you guys. You can also do a MAC address filter and Radius MAC authentication. So we'll go ahead and add that Wi-Fi network. Oh, look, it's even asking us to make that 8 password characters. So we'll just make that through 8. Cool, so our staff network is made, the password is there, and it's attached to the correct VLAN we see right here is our main staff network. So we'll go ahead and now make our guest network. Now this one is the one that we have to be critical of. This one, we'll just leave this one open actually. So we'll hit manual, we'll make this one a guest hotspot. And it says, look, we've applied your guest hotspot profile to this SSID. By default, clients connected will be isolated from all the other internal networks. Very good, very good. We also want to make sure that this goes to our guest network. As we see, it's also showing that it's a guest labeled network. So guest will go on to guest, and the Wi-Fi type is also a guest hotspot. So it not only is isolating them from the physical network layer, but also on the actual Wi-Fi access points themselves. It is making sure that they're not touching any of the internal traffic. As far as the password goes, we can just make that whatever we want. Usually I leave it open. We also could do a bandwidth profile, but we'll go ahead and set that up in a little bit. We won't do that just right now. We'll go ahead and add all of that. So now we have both our guest and our staff, and then we will create one more. This one will actually be a hidden network. This one will be for IoT devices. So we'll do Contoso-IoT, and we'll do a password for this one. Again, we'll just make it whatever we want. The network, we will go ahead and point this one down to our IoT network. We'll go ahead and do our guest hotspot as well. Cool, it took that automatically. We'll leave that on 2.4 and 5. Really important here, client device isolation. This prevents the clients on the same AP from talking to themselves. This can be a problem in IoT though, if you have one Google Home device trying to talk to a light switch, or if you have a phone that's on that network connected to a different network. Usually it can create some problems. So this is up to you to leave enabled. You can disable this if devices on the IoT network need to talk to each other or a bridge on that network. But again, it's still a guest labeled network, so it won't talk to your production, your core, your servers. So that one's kind of up to you to leave enabled. You can keep that enabled or disabled at your will. We'll leave that disabled for now. And then hide Wi-Fi name, we'll go ahead and hit enabled. We don't really need anyone seeing that popping up on their phone. We'll just leave that one hidden. Everything else looks fine though. We'll go ahead and hit add Wi-Fi network. Now we have our 3 networks, our guest and our staff. And then there's IoT there as well. You can also do some global AP settings. You can change where the channel width is on the 2.4, the 5 gigahertz, change transmit power. I usually leave a lot of these on auto. Ubiquiti actually does a really good job at scanning its surroundings and adjusting accordingly. So I actually use a lot of that in auto mode because it usually does a really good job of that. You can do wireless meshing as well. It allows APs to connect to other APs wirelessly to kind of rebroadcast the network again. This can be really good for places where you may not be able to run a cable to, but still have a decent Wi-Fi connection. You just want to rebroadcast it. I usually leave it disabled because I don't like to have an AP that's not on a wire and kind of confuse me when it's being set up that it's working, but it's not. I mean, other than that, now we have Wi-Fi, we have our networks. Really, everything is enabled. Under the networks, if you're in a production network, we do need to look at a couple of the global switch settings. So jumbo frames. Jumbo frames are for, of course, it says larger than 1,500 bytes. Connectivity issues may occur if you don't have support for this feature or if they're improperly configured. If you have applications that require jumbo frames, enable it. If you don't or don't even know what it is, probably don't mess with it. Flow control, you can also do stuff with packet latency by pausing traffic. You can increase TCP throughput. Again, if you don't know what it is, probably don't touch it. Spanning tree is very important and can actually save you a lot of problems in your environment. I always use RSTP, and it basically allows you to make loops in your network. That way you can create rings and stuff like that and have redundancy at the switch level. I usually just leave RSTP enabled by default, and then 802.1x control on the ports. Again, if you don't have radius set up, there's no need to touch any of this. All of that looks good. Now let's go ahead and go to our firewall and security. This is the fun part of the firewall that I really like to kind of get in and to touch on. So country restrictions, pretty obvious if we want to restrict any countries from coming in or from us going out to them. I always do both directions just to make sure that the country can't come and ping us and we can't ping them. For example, we could just put like China and add it, as well as like if Afghanistan. You can really go through and add as many countries as you want in services that you don't really have. It's better to block as much as you don't need and then allow them through when you do need them. So I usually just leave, Canada, Mexico, and the United States unblocked, as well as, Europe. We have some services over there that we like to connect to, but other than that, usually we block a lot of other stuff. Threat management. This is a very important part. This will affect how your UDM Pro performs. If you have a gigabit connection, it may slow it down. If you don't have a gigabit connection, you can kind of mess with this and it won't really affect too much. So you have 2 different modes you can do. You can do detect only and detect and block. I like to do detect and block because I know how to set up a lot of that stuff to not be overly sensitive. But choose whichever one that you would like to. System sensitivity has identification of things like viruses, peer-to-peer, stuff like that. You can also choose your threat categories down below if you want to block certain things like SQL or DNS or web apps or stuff like that. Usually we just go ahead and we block things like all the stuff up top, malware, all that kind of stuff, P2P. I usually block a lot of P2P stuff because we don't have any VPNs or stuff like that would use that in our network, as well as Tor. Save that, and that'll kind of create its own custom category, depending on what we select in here. Or you can go with their settings of low, medium, and high, but look into that. There's also the dark web blocker. This will prevent traffic encrypted from Tor moving through your networks. We usually enable that. Malicious website blocker will also use UniFi's database that they have on their end to kind of update IP addresses that could be malicious and stuff like that. I hit enable, but sometimes it can cause problems because you don't have control over all of those IP addresses. So be conscious when you do that. And then down below, you'll actually see firewall rules that have been in place. So, there's internet rules, there's rules within your LAN, there's rules within your guest network, to make sure that all the restrictions happen. A lot of those will get automatically filled in, but if you need to add new rules, this is where you'll do them. You can also have different contract modules for things like NAT that may be a problem. You can add things into here. You can also change your logging actions in case you also want to send these over to like Greatlog or Splunk or something like of that nature. There's also port forwarding rules in case you need to open up a service to the internet. And there's the threat management allow list. You can create custom lists in here and allow certain IPs if you're having problems with them to make sure that they're always allowed in. But this is our basic setup. This will get us to where we need to go. We'll apply those changes, and then we should see them be reflected shortly. Traffic management, we can have this section for some of the rules, different routes that we want to make. You can add static routes in here in case you have different subnets or networks that you're trying to get to through other routers that you want to make the UDM Pro aware of. So we'll go ahead, we can create rules in here. We can block a specific app. We can block, let's say that you want to block Instagram. Say you want to block Instagram on the phones. Target would be all devices, schedules always. And then this actually does this on an application layer. So this is really cool. You can speed limit, you can throttle. This is a very, very awesome feature to have in the UDM Pro. Definitely take advantage of it. Look into what's offered in that traffic management section. It's a great place to explore some cool options. And then teleport and VPN, you can go ahead and create your VPN server here. You can make a layer 2 VPN that your external associates can VPN back into the network. This is where it would be. You'd see your IP address here. There's a pre-shared key. You would go ahead and actually put them on, a network and give them a gateway that they have. That's kind of the VLAN for VPNs. You could even do like radius, so that way when people want to authenticate to the VPN, they actually have to use like their Active Directory credentials or their email login. Very cool stuff. Another great place to play around with. And now that we got most of our stuff set up, just a couple things to wrap up around. We want to give our switch a static IP. We started the router with .1. Usually we'll keep the switches in like the 10-ish area. We'll go ahead and make sure. You can also see the network that the switch is attached to. Make sure it's on our default network. That's our network management network. We'll keep that in there. We'll go ahead and set it to static. We'll give it a 10.69.1, and we'll give it something a little bit lower. It's at 131 right now. We'll give it a .10 address, and then its preferred DNS. You can set that up within the UDM. We usually just point it to 111 for now. Subnet mask will be 255.255.255.0. Alternate DNS we can do 8888. Gateway will be 10.69.11, and all of that looks good. Spanning tree's priorities right there as well. You'll notice too, if we go into the switch and take a look at the ports, we see that we have some options. If we go into our port manager, we'll actually see that the Flex is connected up at the first port and our UDM Pro is connected to the last port. We just want to make sure that whatever port we're plugging into the UDM Pro into our first switch, or whatever switches we're plugging into the UDM Pro, the port profile is all. That way we can pass all of the VLANs through that, and we make sure that they're all enabled. As well as for APs, the same will apply. You want to make sure you're passing through all the VLANs that you're going to actually be broadcasting. But if you had like a staff computer on, let's say, port 3 and port 5, you would go ahead and choose the networks that would be enabled for that, which would be like main staff, because we don't need to have all of the VLANs pass through on 3 and 5. We would just go into here and select that we just want the port profile to be just main staff. And then, you could see port isolation, all the other cool things that you have to do at the bottom. You can set it to PoE, PoE plus, link speed, you can change all of that. And then we'll go ahead and hit apply and confirm. And you'll see that, port 3 and 5 now have their profile set to main staff. And then we'll also change the AP's IP address as well. We'll do 10.69.1. We'll give this one and management network again is that default network. We're leaving it on that Netman network. Another cool thing too is if you go to the settings and you want to go to the top, you can also search settings too. So like if I wanted to change the DNS that my network uses, I could just go ahead and type in DNS and I would choose my DNS server. Want to go into our primary WAN here, and then we would just go ahead and hit manual. You could choose your own DNS servers that your router uses in case you want to use like 111 or you want to use something else. And of course, the most important thing is setting the console to dark mode. We will go ahead and apply that immediately. Looks way better. As well as you'll also see there's your updates. You can choose your channels. We do automatic device updates at 3 a.m. That's kind of out of the normal work window. That's usually what it has there, but you can add a schedule. You can also change that to not do it at all. Also super critical to make sure that you take backups. You can do a manual backup through here. You can also do cloud backups that actually go to your UniFi account, which is super awesome. Highly recommend you set that up. That'll be right up in this tab as well. That's really it for the base, the backbone of our network. Again, your network may or will 100% look different than this, but as long as we're applying these concepts of making sure that devices have the least amount of access that they need, making sure that our networks are set up as securely as we possibly can, and going to a layered security approach is better than just plugging it in, creating an SSID and letting it roll. We really are trying to set you guys up for one step above, just a regular configuration. We really want you to take advantage of some of the features that UniFi offers. So let us know down in the comments if you guys would do anything differently or how you guys are using your UniFi networks. We're super interested to hear things that you guys have done and how you guys have kind of tricked out your networks. So thanks again for watching. See you guys in the next video.